Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. We hope as you listen remotely that you and your families are healthy and safe during these trying times. I am Jennifer Schaus, and we are coming to you live from downtown Washington, D.C. today. Our webinar last Friday, March 20th, was created in response to the COVID-19 virus and the impact to federal contractors. Due to the feedback we received and the new questions that arose as the situation evolved, we wanted to continue the series. So we've got new questions, new speakers, and on that note, I would like to thank the speakers for their time, their input, and working with us on this project. It came together with very little notice, and I also want to thank everyone on my team who made this possible. So a few notes, you can find last week's recording on our website, and today's webinar is also being recorded. Slides will be available on slideshare.net, and the webinar will be on our YouTube channel and also on our website about an hour or so after we finish. So here's how it's going to work today. We're going to share a couple helpful government websites that'll possibly be referenced in today's sessions. And again, the slides are going to be available on slideshare.net. They're actually already up there. And then I'm going to introduce their speakers, and they all come from a variety of sectors and backgrounds. Once we get through the speaker introduction, we're going to go through the questions that were emailed to us, and one of the speakers will answer. We've got about 62 questions, and the speakers have 1 minute or less to answer, so we're going to try to run through those pretty quickly. If you find that your question was not answered, please send us an email to the hello@jenniferschaus.com, which is at the bottom of your screen, to get answers. Okay, so let's dig in. These slides provide a high-level overview of some of the contracting opportunities with various agencies. Nothing secret here, so if you've got an internet connection, then you can go to betasam.gov to see these opportunities. And as you can see, the opportunities range from medical supplies to remediation and disinfection services. There's a whole host of opportunities, and I'm sure we'll talk about those as we dig into some of the questions. We also host a complimentary FAR series. FAR Part 18 will probably come up in today's discussion. We're covering that on May 1st, and the link is provided there. We've got a speaker from SBA today, and I'm sure he, as well as others, will touch on this disaster loan.sba.gov site. The Defense Production Act, which will come up as well, is listed here. You've got the Critical Infrastructure Workforce link, your IRS tax relief, GSA, what they are doing, Department of Labor, OSHA, and the workplace, DOD's response, the L1B memo, which has been referenced quite frequently. And now we're going to dig into our speakers. So first from SBA, we've got Roderick Johnson. He is with the Lender Relations, and we're delighted to have him with us. Our legal speakers include Tony Anakeef over at Williams Mullen. We've got Jody Reed from McMahon, Welch & Learned, and Seth Bazarenweg with his firm, Bazarenweg Leonard. They're an employment law firm. Our public affairs speakers include Ann Sullivan, and our finance speaker is Clay Goldsboro. These are all great people, and we're delighted to have them here. So Roderick, and we've got some procurement folks. I need to slow down a little bit. So we've got Joshua Frank over at RSM Federal, William Randolph, Think Acquisition, Jerry McGinn, who's joined us from George Mason, and Judy Bratt over at Summit and Site. So now we're going to dig into our questions from the public. The first few we're going to go to Roderick Johnson over at SBA. So the first question is, it seems that the federal programs for employers with greater than 500 employees is where federal financial programs stop. Are there any programs that apply to the larger companies, especially those with large blue-collar workers unable to telework? Roderick, if you can chime in here, please.
All right, thank you. As of right now today, they're only looking at companies that have 500 employees or less. And the bill that the Senate passed, I guess it was Wednesday, it will take into account companies that have a larger number of employees. But as of right now today, it's a hard cutoff of companies with 500 employees. And that's it.
Okay, great. And our second question, will all of the COVID-19 EIDL loans will be on a 30-year term?
All right. So, yes, it's a 30-year term automatically. The interest rate is 3.75% for for-profit organizations and 2.75% for nonprofit organizations. It's important to note, though, that you have a 1-year deferment on the payment. So if you close the loan today, then you don't have to make your first payment until 1 year after today.
Great, thanks. And our third question is, what happens if your company is currently losing money? Does SBA check your credit rating or just assist you? What is the process to file for financial assistance?
Okay, it's actually very simple. They're going to look at the FICO score of the owner who has 20% or more interest in the firm. And then number two, they're going to take the 2019 annual gross profit and divide that by 2, and that's going to be the loan amount that you receive. Those are the only two things that they're looking at this point.
Okay, great. And number 4 is, we plan to apply for the Business Interruption Loan Relief Program, but have some questions regarding the structure of the loan. Specifically, how do these loans work with existing loans or lines of credit currently in place? Do these government loans require a first position in business assets? Do they require owner personal guarantees? It would seem these loans would need to work in conjunction with existing business loans, but I do not see details on the required loan structure. And Roderick, this one is still you.
Okay, so yes, you will still have to personally guarantee on what we're calling the EIDL loan, economic injury disaster relief. So yes, you will have to personally guarantee. If you already have a line of credit with your bank, the SBA is still going to take a Uniform Commercial Code 1 blanket lien on the assets, but we're going to be in the second position behind your bank. And again, it's a 30-year fixed rate term. If you're a for-profit business, 3.75%, nonprofit, 2.75%, and you will have your first payment will be deferred until next year. Very simple structure.
Okay, great. Thank you for that answer. And number 6, will all COVID-19 EIDL loans be for 12 months, no interest and no payments, and 6 months of operating expenses?
Yes, it will be. Well, it's actually based on 6 months of your gross profit for 2019. Yes, it's for 30 years, and again, it is deferred for 1 year. Now, one thing I'd like to add, if you have an existing 7A or 504 loan, you can go directly to your lender and ask them for a 6-month deferment. All the banks have already been notified that they're supposed to be offering the deferment on current SBA loans to their clients.
Okay, great. And I believe that's your questions. We're going to move over to I would like to know about the impact of Service Contract Act contractors and their employees, particularly Ability One, Source America contractors. Tony?
Yeah, hi. So the answer is twofold. Let me address Ability One. Under Part 18 of the FAR, which deals with emergency contracting, agencies that have Ability One contracts can change the scope of work without being required to get prior approval and notification. With regard to the Service Contract Act, the SCA does not make any specific provisions for this type of situation. The answer to this question is that you're going to have to look at your contract to see whether you're going to continue to perform. Beyond that, the relationship between employer and employee continues to be the same as it would be under a non-emergency situation. So the two things you need to do, the contractor needs to talk to the government to see what the status of the contract is, and the employees need to be in contact. Hello? The employees need to be in conversation with their employers.
Okay, great. Thanks. And Seth, were you able to call in? Perhaps not. Okay, so Jody, can we request a clearance to return to work from their doctor? I'm assuming this would be implying that the employee perhaps had the virus.
A lot of that is going to depend upon what a company's employee policies are. A lot of companies require doctor notices prior to returning to work normally. So in those cases, it's a no-brainer. You can obviously request a clearance. If you don't have that as part of your company policy, then you might have a HIPAA issue with regard to returning to work. But nonetheless, you can certainly make sure that they do stay home the full 14 days, which is where they're basically saying you have. Most employees, though, are going to probably, what I should say is you can ask the question, but if an employee refuses to answer, then you're going to have to make a decision as to whether you want them to come back or not come back, and whether you're going to give them paid leave or unpaid leave. If your policy, if your policy says they have to give it, then it's a no-brainer. And that's kind of the way that one's going to work out.
Okay, great. And Seth, I think you may have joined?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we're going to go back to this question number 8, which was for you. What legal rights do I have as an employer to keep my employees from doing discretionary travel?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. The company has significant discretion to limit discretionary travel. In light of the health emergency and the rapid spread of the virus, it's appropriate for companies, and in fact, it's expected of them under relevant OSHA regulations, to maintain safe and appropriate working conditions. As a result, given the transmission and spread of the illness and the fact that the travel bans are currently in place, there's significant discretion by the company to limit just about all discretionary travel at this time.
Okay, great. Thanks. And we'll go to number 10. Clay, this is going to go over to you. How do you anticipate the stock market performing for the remainder of the year as you look into your crystal ball?
Well, the most honest answer I can give is that no one, truly knows, but that's not what you're looking for here today. I expect the stock market to recover to some degree. We've had 3 positive days here recently after what was essentially a disaster for the better part of 4 or 5 weeks here. The concern that we have with respect to the markets is what real impact will the virus have on people's lives and their family members, and as people begin to get sick, how will they view whether or not they should continue to practice social distancing, whether or not they should consider going back to work, depending on what the president says over the next 2 weeks. And then if people do go back to work, does the virus continue to proliferate? And those kinds of factors, which it's much different than some of the downturns we've had in the past because of the health and medical element. And so it makes it even more unpredictable. But I believe that by year's end, we'll certainly be, if not by the summer, certainly be on an upward trend.
Okay, super. Thank you. Number 11, if our contractors are told to stay home, can and how we still get paid? Anne?
Good afternoon. There's a provision in the bill that passed the Senate and should have passed the House by now, or they were considering it when we got on this call. And so it should be to the president's desk today sometime. There's a provision in the bill, and the bill number, if you want to look at the text, is HR 748, and that's the CARES Act, which is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. All right. Section 3610 says that this is an issue for many contractors and over 2 million employees in the defense industrial base. It says that a contractor can be reimbursed for the cost of keeping employees in a ready state, which presumably means on payroll. The reimbursement applies when access to a work site, either the contractors or federal, has been curtailed due to COVID-19 restrictions and the employees cannot telework. Compensation is capped at 40 hours per week and limited to the minimum established contract billing rate. So this is a really important issue that Congress identified. And so how do you get paid? Well, the Congress just told the agencies to figure it out and and pay their contractors who cannot come to work until the pandemic is over.
Great, thank you. And our next question goes over to William Randolph. Can I claim compensation from the government for having zero income and being a woman and minority-owned business owner? If so, how?
So I believe the answer to that would be no. The compensation is really about Congress has identified that the focus is on employment. So keeping employees of the United States gainfully employed. So compensation is a secondary activity. I think the primary activity will be the focus on employment. And I don't believe it will have anything to do with any socioeconomic categories in the small business arena.
Okay, great. Thank you. Number 13 is we're still trying to get a grasp on how COVID-19 is impacting the overall acquisition environment. What should we be doing right now to protect and retain our current contracts? And is there a way to position for additional revenue from a business development perspective? Josh?
Yeah, good afternoon. Okay. So for those that have contracts today, there are 5 things that you should be doing to protect and retain your existing contracts. First, talk to every one of your contracting officers. And it's important that you ask several questions. One, are you considered mission essential personnel? You know, all the agencies and military commands have gone down the road of identifying who is considered mission essential, mission critical from a personnel perspective. You want to know that in the event they leave the office. Number 2, if you have to work remote, do you have access to all your systems? You want to know that. That could delay your payments. So that's number 1. Number 2, over communicate and be hyper responsive. Touch your contracting officers on a weekly basis. You also want to be available 24/7. That means that at 9:30 at night, don't let your calls go to voicemail, okay? Because that's a lost order immediately. Right now, your number 1 objective is the retention of current contracts. Third, if you sell products, provide alternatives for what the supply chain can't support. You want to call and you want to email. Send them a list of what you have on hand, what you can obtain in a week, the volume that you can support, and what are your shipping and delivery timelines. Educate the government folks. And most important, map the specifications of your product to the specifications of the product they want. Make it easy for them to find an alternative. Fourth, document everything. If you need to identify settlement costs, respond to stop work orders, you want to keep an employee paid, you're going to need to document everything. And last, it's real simple, a general ledger account or add a category to your financial system for COVID-related costs. And that's it. I'll discuss finding new opportunities on an upcoming question.
Great, thanks. Is government liable to finding alternate work resources to ensure small businesses can maintain their contractors? Jerry?
Yes, I think the question is about maintaining their contracts versus contractors, but the short answer is the government is not liable to find the alternative work situations for the contractors, but the OMB and DOD have both kind of given guidance that they want agencies to have maximum flexibility to keep doing the work that the contract workforce is doing. So I think the key here is for companies to work closely with their government customers to find to identify their limitations they have in work environment and make sure they're on the same page for performing the work required under the contract.
Super, thanks. And Judy, over to you for number 15. Will the contract opportunities be for supply chain and improving processes, or more for materials and masks? Do you also foresee opportunities for medical staffing?
Thanks, Jennifer. The March 22nd memo from the Office of Management and Budget you can find this on the OMB website on harnessing technology to support mission continuity seems to favor accelerated improvements in supply chain and business processes. In response to the national emergency, agencies are directed to use the breadth of technology capabilities to fill service gaps and deliver mission outcomes. The memo goes on for about 4 pages of Q&A. It's not an RFP, but it could be a conversation opener with buyers where you have relationships. As for medical staffing, dear goodness, yes. Experienced contractors who can provide a steady supply of healthy medical staff will be in high demand. They'll also be held to high expectations, high standards of performance, high reliability, and high levels of service. But if you're waiting for opportunities to get published on sam.gov, you're missing the boat. Get your research rolling now, light up your network, turn over every rock. Talk to people you already know who like you and trust you. Ask for introductions and referrals, get on the phone, and see how you can help.
This is Jody. Can I add something to that? That's very useful. There's also an OMB memo that came out, M20-18, on March 20th. And in it, it's very important, is it increased the micro pressure threshold from 10,000 to 20,000 for domestic purchases and to 30,000 for purchases outside the U.S. It increased the simplified acquisition threshold from 250,000 to 750,000 for domestic and
Jody, I think you cut out, so we're going to move on to number 16. The OMB memo that she references, the link to that is in the beginning of the slides. So number 16, what are we responsible for as a company business owner when it comes to our employees? Ann and Tony, we're going to let you guys 30 seconds each. So Ann, we'll go to you first.
Well, private employers with fewer than 500 employees and all public employers have to provide 80 hours of sick leave for full-time employees. For part-time employees and hourly workers, they're given the typical hours worked in a 2-week period without fear of losing their job. Reasons for this leave can be complying with a federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order, self-quarantine per a healthcare provider's advice, or obtaining a medical diagnosis for coronavirus, or care for an individual who's in quarantine, or a child whose school or daycare has closed due to coronavirus.
Okay. Tony,
So-
anything to add in 30 seconds or less?
Yeah, Ann has been referring to this Family Rescue Act. Also for employers, to the extent that an employee may have gotten the coronavirus, you need to track all of that on OSHA forms 300 and 300A. You have a duty to, you have an obligation to stay in touch with your employees to keep them informed.
Thanks. And I believe we have that OSHA link as well in the beginning of the slides. Seth, over to you for this. Do I have any legal authority to require employees to disclose all travel to us, sick relatives, et cetera, so we can fulfill reporting requirements to our respective contracting offices?
Thank you for the question. The short answer is yes. Under the OSHA-related provisions and related requirements to provide a safe workplace, it's critical that the company be able to stay on top of and be aware of any information that would relate directly to the continued health and safety of its workers, including whether someone might have a proximity to the coronavirus. It's essential to be able to be aware of that information, not only from the aspect of protecting people within corporate headquarters, but especially for federal government contractors, we have an additional obligation to make sure that people at the work site are kept in a safe work environment and that the customer is kept apprised of all directly related information regarding the health and safety of everyone there. So therefore, under the present emergency situation, the company would absolutely have the authority to do so.
Okay, great. And we'll move on to number 18. Back to you, Tony. As a federal general contractor, we have ongoing small business size contracts in process in many different states such as Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, and Virginia. Our corporate headquarters is in Virginia. So far, as of today's date, none of our contracts have been suspended. However, in case one or more do get suspended in different states, what is the process for us to disaster relief? Additionally, if the area that our project and base is located is not declared a disaster area yet, the project gets suspended. We apply for relief from those project level and associated corporate staff that will be affected. Tony?
Yeah, let me try to break this down into priorities. On Jennifer's webpage are 3 documents. One is the Department of Health CISA guidelines on what's an essential business. 2 is the Department of Defense declaration that pretty much the entire defense contract business are essential. and 3 is the OMB guidance on the government to be flexible. So we've learned today that the CARE Act probably will be approved. That is going to address most of this. You need to look in each state whether your business has been declared essential. Many government contractors are deemed essential. The bigger issue is whether you have access to your facility. If you are closed down, then you want to see if you can work remotely. To the extent that you are unable to or hampered in your ability to work, as I think someone said earlier, under the CARES Act, you are going to be continued ability to keep your staff on standby and get paid. Beyond that, though, you have an ongoing obligation to perform your contract, and if you fail to do so, the government can take appropriate action. So, like someone also said earlier, it's critical to be in touch with your contracting office on a regular basis and get guidance. The disaster relief area is covered, one, by what your governor has issued, and then under the CARES Act and the SBA loan programs we've discussed earlier.
Great, thanks. And Jody, for you, number 19, an employer with a facility that has over 150 full-time employees working, or as an employer, what can I do if one of these employees tests positive for the virus, is sent home for the 14 quarantine day period, and now wants to come back to work? Can I request that he or she bring a doctor's note saying they are free of the virus?
The answer here is pretty similar to the answer to question 9. Once again, it's going to depend a lot on your own policies. Most companies, like I said, have a policy that if you have some disease that requires, or an injury for that matter, that requires a doctor's note for you to return to full work, then it's very easy to answer. Their HIPAA has not been removed yet, although in this particular instance, there's probably going to be some exceptions made to this. You can certainly ask, if you don't have a policy, you can certainly ask the employee to provide that note. But if they refuse, then I'm going to probably strongly suggest that you talk with a labor and employment attorney with regard to that. But you can certainly not let them come back without it.
Super, thanks. And in the interest of time, we're going to move on quickly here to number 20. If an employee contacts the virus that has the capability to work remote with no additional action needed by the company, and the company does not allow the employee to work remote, is that considered negligence? Seth?
Thank you. I wouldn't really necessarily call it an act of negligence, but I would say that kind of a reaction is not really necessary. The company is not required to force the employee into sick leave. If the individual has mild symptoms and is able to work remotely, safely, and in a manner where they're not subject to undue stress, and has communicated to the company that he or she wants to continue to perform work, my recommendation would be to continue to monitor his or her health, but to not force that employee into sick leave. So I wouldn't call it negligence, but I don't think that would in any way be required, certainly under any principles of employment law or any of the new provisions of the emergency legislation.
Okay, great, thanks. So number 21, will the stimulus package impact government contracting companies financially? Clay?
Yes, it should provide some much needed relief for many of these firms who are, clearly and obviously strapped right now because of an inability to conduct their business. And so if applied properly, I think businesses can use it to sustain themselves through this down period while they continue to try to get back into a positive posture. The concern I have, while I think it's necessary and important for the stimulus package, is will workers actually come back to work? And one of the main reasons, because that obviously impacts what can be done once the package is implemented, right? Can they go back to business as normal? But what do they do if their children are still at home? They can't just, many of them can't just come back to work and leave their kids at home, depending on the kids' ages. So, while the stimulus package is important and powerful, and I think it can change the direction for many businesses, in fact, save many of them, I don't know that business as normal will be seen anytime soon, just because of, most of these individuals have families, and that plays an important role as well.
Super, thank you. Number 22, if employees have no sick time, do we have to pay them anyway due to federal order? Anne?
Well, the short answer is yes, but I want to elaborate on my last answer because I didn't have time. There's a caveat to having to pay sick leave, the emergency sick leave, and the expanded family leave, which is the bill passed by the Senate and now just the House allows the Department of Labor to potentially exempt businesses under 50 employees if it jeopardizes the viability of the business. So look for regulations. Actually, the Department of Labor is looking for feedback right now as they promulgate those regulations March 29. So this would be a good time for you to go online and see if you can submit your idea. The other thing is just that there's a cap, of course. Employee costs at $5,110 for an employee who's taking leave for their own illness, and $2,000 for employees who are taking care of other people or children. And so that there's a cap to how much can be, is required. In exchange, employers paying this will be able to get 100% payroll tax credit quarterly. So those are additional things I wanted to point out.
Okay, great. We'll move on to question 23. We're about 1:30, so we're going to try to ask for some short answers here. So, Seth, can we request a doctor's note to prove an employee has the virus? That sounds like a previous question, but I'll let you chime in.
Yes. The short answer is yes. You can require a doctor's note in order to have your accounting materials completed and to make sure that you're covered for accounting and for purposes to demonstrate the expenses with the IRS. You need to have those in the employee file. However, I would ask for those gradually and delicately under the recognition that if people are quarantined and or if they can't physically get into their doctor's office, to allow them have a short extension of time in order to provide that to the company.
Super, thanks. And number 24, this law is effective April 2nd, 2020. Does that mean people can't charge to the leave before that date? Not sure. These are just copied and pasted from what you guys sent us. So, William, if you can make sense of the question and provide an answer, it's all yours.
So yes, I'm still here. This law is effective. I mean, people can't charge the leave before that date.
There we go. I can hear you.
Okay, great. So normally when these laws are effective in situations of something dynamic happening in the federal government, there tends to be a retroactive date that is also in the guidance, because it takes the government a while to execute the laws, to get the legislation in place. So likely there will be a retroactive date, probably something in the early March timeframe, where the first social distancing guidance came out, the presidential guidance came out. Likely that date will be the effective date for all activity, reimbursement, and engagement with the CARES Act.
Okay, great. And Seth, number 25, can we only apply for those employees that are billable to customer if you're a staffing firm?
Yeah, although I thought the wording on that question was maybe a tad unclear, I believe I can answer the essence of it. If the employee is an individual who is currently inactive for any reason, and if they're not on billable work, then they can simply be treated as being off payroll, and then they can be placed on temporary furlough, and they'll be qualified for the enhanced state-based unemployment benefits that are going to be in effect. And if the individual is working, and if they're still active on payroll, then they should be treated as such. But if anybody is inactive, then the important thing to keep in mind is that under the new rules, it's very favorable because there's an enhanced coverage and in a prolonged period of time where people can get essentially full state-based unemployment benefits as a result of a furlough.
Okay, great. And 26, Josh, our company sells products. Half of our products are DCAA Buy America Act compliant, and the other half are not. Is there any chance we could sell the products that are not BAA compliant? What about other products that are not an exact match to the product specification for products the government buys today?
Yeah, so, I'm currently working with about a dozen companies that have access to non-American products, and they've all spoken to the state governors. They're talking to just tons of federal buyers, specifically the VA, and they could all care less where products are coming from. Now, I haven't seen any guidance from GSA or the president waiving, the Buy America Act, or any acquisition shop for that matter, but it has been de facto waived and suspended. And if the products aren't an exact match, government doesn't care. They simply want to protect their people. One of our clients has a manufacturer agent in China. They're talking to them on an hourly basis. As of 10 a.m. this morning, the royal family in Saudi Arabia is trying to get 45 million masks, right? China's already said they can't support. So bottom line, the BAA may not be formally waived, but various agencies and commands are totally ignoring it at this point.
Josh, I want to chime in on that for a second. It's Judy Bratt. The Buy American Act, is my understanding, is it also gets waived under the micro purchase threshold. And so that's become $20,000 under the emergency provision. So that may be additional information to think about.
Yeah, this is Annika. I wanted to say one thing because this is important. Under FAR Part 18, agencies can waive the Trade Agreements Act. The second thing to keep in mind is that there's a lot of litigation cases out there that when the dust settles down the road and people try to get paid, those statutes that everyone's ignoring now sometimes get reasserted by the government.
And speakers, if we can ask you to go on mute, somebody's got some background noise that's interfering here. And we're going to move on to 27 in the interest of time to get through all 60 questions. Jody, how do we roll out the new paid time off and sick leave law?
Well, I'm going to have a very quick answer on that, and then I want to comment on the last one real quick, too. The quick answer on that one is Department of Labor has to issue regulations on this. The big thing that you can do right today, and the only thing, quite honestly, you can do right today is notify your employees that you're going to be giving them this new paid time off, what the restrictions are, and then track any employee's time as a separate sick leave account as you're going through. Because until the regulations actually come out, it's going to be the devil's in the details. And hopefully when the regulations come out, it's going to be fairly explicit on how you're going to do this and what you're going to have to do and what paperwork is going to have to be submitted. As to the prior question, really quick, if this is being waived, you believe it's being waived, make sure your contract expressly states it, because memories are going to be very short afterwards.
Thanks. And Seth, in an effort to protect our workforce, we require mandatory temperature testing of all employees prior to entering the facility.
During the term of this crisis, yes. Due to the desire and the urgent need to detect potential infection and communication of the virus, for this limited period of time, the company can require that, both as to its headquarters and or at the government site, to ensure that everybody is protected from any kind of risk of exposure.
Okay, thank you. And Jerry, will most of the procurement opportunities be at the state and local level? What departments within federal and what departments within state and local will see the most dollars?
I think it's going to be all of the above. There's going to be a lot of opportunities at the state and local level, but I think the stimulus bill that passed is a lot of it's going to be at federal level. So, and they're spread around the government at the federal level at least. A lot of it going to HHS, but there's also going to be a lot of opportunities in FEMA, within the Department of Homeland Security, within the Veterans Affairs, Department of Veterans Affairs, and then within DOD. So the opportunity can be spread about, and the best place to look is at sam.beta.gov, and you can just search COVID like you had at the front of the deck. That's the best place. The local, I'm not a state and local BD person, so I can't help you there. But it's going to be a lot of the health, hospital agencies, health agencies, or emergency response agencies at the state and local level.
Right. And number 30 for federal firm fixed price multi-year contracts, what's the likelihood of being able to claim for extended overhead? Jody?
It's fairly high, actually. But you have to make sure that you're tracking your extra costs. And there's quite a few legal arguments, not the least of which is potentially change conditions. The language that's going to be in the CARE Act, the memorandums that are coming out of MOMB where they're saying work with people. So there's a fairly good chance, but only if you keep track of the costs. If you try and find out what these costs were 6 months from now, the chances are probably zero. You're going to really need to keep, even if you're a firm fixed price and not normally tracking separate costs, you're going to really have to keep track of the costs separately. And that's going to greatly increase your chances of getting a claim.
Great. And 31, Seth, should we assume Department of Labor will have the required poster?
Yes, DOL has the required poster. They made it available a couple of days ago. If you go online to dol.gov/sites, you'll look at the main poster, which is entitled Employee Rights, Paid Sick Leave, and Expanded Family and Medical Leave under the new Act. And you'll be able to locate it very quickly.
Super. Thanks. And 32, Jody, will the government find additional funding to cover increased costs due to lower direct base resulting in higher indirect rates?
Really the same answer as the prior question. It's all going to depend upon how well you do or don't keep track of your costs. Again, the bill that's in the Senate and supposedly being passed by the House today is also allowing funding for contractors. But the bottom line is you've got to start tracking those costs. You've got to start tracking those costs today. Separately.
Thanks. 33, can the extended FMLA be used intermittently, Seth?
The answer is yes. DOL just a day or two ago provided clarification with respect to this question, and the answer is that provided that the employer and the employee communicate directly and that they have reached an agreement and they have an understanding of what parts of the day or week will be applied, it is now possible to use the expanded FMLA leave intermittently. Companies just need to make sure that they communicate with the employees and that they have it tracked down in their schedule.
Super, thanks. 34, how does the Sovereign Act come into play with federal military firm fixed price contracts? One of our contracts is invoking this clause for a DoD firm fixed price contract. Tony?
So I hope that and it's just been enacted by the House, the CARES Act will help solve this, and I hope DoD won't do this often, but the Sovereign Act allows the government to avoid claims. It's an affirmative defense against contract claims when there's a disruption. It is something that can only be used when there is a public and general act by the government rather than a private act of the government. There are two questions you have to ask: whether the act is attributable to the government as a contractor or in its sovereign capacity, and two, whether the act otherwise would relieve the government of liability under principles of government contract law. The simple answer is if the government closes a base because of coronavirus, that may well be deemed a public act and would preclude claims against it. However, the CARES Act might allow you to continue paying your folks. This is highly litigated. To the extent this occurs, as other people have said, keep close track of your costs, and it's something that you may have to litigate when the dust settles.
Okay, thanks. 35. What is the optimal strategy to protect oneself against these market downturns? Clay?
Yes. First and foremost, for business, as an example, if the business spends $10,000 a month, then the business should keep a multiple of $3,000 or $30,000 in cash in the bank at all times. For individuals, it's 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses should be set aside at all times. And as importantly, with respect to one's financial plan, all businesses and individuals should have market-based assets and non-market correlated assets. That way, in these kinds of down periods, you can sort of withstand them and sustain yourselves, opposed to, which is happening now, sort of a mild panic when you're losing 20 to 30% of your portfolio.
Super, thank you. And number 36, what happens if our workforce comes down with positive tests for coronavirus and we can't complete the project on time? Judy, your thoughts in 30 seconds or less.
Yes, ma'am. First, read OMB Memo M like Mike 20-18, Managing Federal Contract Performance Issues Associated with the Novel Coronavirus. The reference FARs include excusable delays at FAR Part 52.249-14, 52.212-4, and 52.211-13. Next, talk to your contracting officer and get clarity. The memo states, in determining the best course of action, the contracting officer should discuss the situation with the contractor, so do that.
Super. And Jody, 30 seconds or less, any legal input that's different from what Judy said?
Not really. If you are the prime contractor, it's going to be a little bit more different if you are a subcontractor, and you're going to need to read your subcontracts to make sure. Hopefully they've passed down the FAR and the FAR clauses, but if they've not and they have a different force majeure clause, you're going to have to read that clause to determine whether or not you're going to be able to use it as a force majeure event. My gut says that regardless of what's in your contract, subcontractors will be able to take advantage of the same thing. But you have to communicate. You have to communicate with your prime contractor, and you need to communicate with your other subcontractors.
Super, thank you. And Seth, number 37, we are working on mission critical projects and have been directed to continue working for our military projects. In the event our personnel gets sick as a result, what liability does an employer have?
The short answer is the employer does not have liability. If it was following reasonable requirements from the customer and was providing a safe work environment, and due to circumstances beyond its control during this extraordinary historic moment, somebody does get sick, the company does not have liability for that instance. The company should just then make sure that the individual is quarantined safely and provided appropriate health, but there's no claim in that instance for any liability against the employer.
Great, thanks. And 38, does the government plan a national public service campaign? There are mixed messages out there regarding social distancing, 10 people or 50 people. Who would be the lead agency to develop this campaign, because it seems that CDC is being sidelined? Does this legislation provide for such a campaign? William?
So at this point, I see no signs of a national campaign being created outside of the flatten the curve and the presidential guidance on social distancing. All of the locality instances of social distancing are being governed by the governors of the states.
Okay, great. And moving on, 39, if a prime contractor operates in a state that has an executive order shutting down non-life essential businesses, but the government facility in which the prime contractor remains open, will the contractor be in default if the contractor does not provide the support and labor as required by the contract, or does the state executive order and the law trump the federal government industrial military complex staying open? Jerry?
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't give definitive guidance on this. But the state executive order would supersede federal guidance, OMB guidance. But I think the intent of both of the OMB and the DoD guidance is for companies to work very closely with their government customers and have maximum flexibilities based on the situation in that respective state or city. So it would be surprising for contractors to be found in default based on all the flexibility that's been given to during this time.
Okay, thanks. And 40, Jody, do you for this, if the government does not issue a stop order and due to the COVID-19, there is no work to perform, should the contractor continue to charge the contract, maybe via idle charge code for the time the employees are ready and available to perform the contract as otherwise required? For example, on-site repair personnel who have 365 days, 24-hour contract that have nothing to repair since the facility may have closed due to COVID-19. If not, would this then lead to possible claims?
Okay, there is the potential for the claim for idle time, but there's a reasonable standardness, and I don't think that that's going to go away. My understanding from listening to other people is that the CARE Act has a provision that is going to account for some of this idle time, but you still have to be reasonable. You may also end up having to have employees have to take all of their leave that they have available before they can do the idle time. And then finally, it's just going to depend a lot on the skills and how quickly you have to restart. If you have to restart the day the government reopens, and some positions are going to be like that, then you're going to get your chances of getting reimbursement for idle time is much higher than if there's going to be a potential 1 to 2 week delay before you actually get restarted. So all in all, there is the potential. You need to be reasonable in how you do this and keep your fingers crossed.
Okay, great. And 41, Anne, this is going to go to you. Congress is in the process of finalizing COVID-19 response legislation. What's the latest?
So as we were having this webinar, the House passed the Senate bill that we've been referencing, the CARES Act. The president is expected to sign it today because everybody's in a hurry to get this done.
Okay, great. Thanks for that update. Number 42, Judy, to you first. Cold calls or new approaches may be counterproductive for business development in this climate. Are there any specific tips on approaching contracting officer client for pursuing mission-critical sole source contracts? Please discuss any relevant FAR clauses.
Sure. Trust your gut. Start by putting yourself in the buyer's chair. Whose call are they going to take? Someone they know, like, and trust. If you're not that person yet, then be willing to invest time to become that person. Follow the big three. Follow the rules, make it easy, make them look good. Here's what that means. First, read the sole source justifications in FAR Part 6.3. Read the whole thing. Second, keep reading. Notice all the work a contracting officer might need to do to give you a sole source award. It's not all about what's easy for you. How can you make it easy for them? Are you on a GSA schedule, on another vehicle that they need, that they can easily use? And third, understand the contracting officer's under constant pressure, even on a good day. And months later, they're going to face extra layers of auditors and tiger teams. Everything they do is going to be under a microscope. So help your contracting officer be a star and be able to demonstrate competition to the maximum extent practicable, even though it looks like the rules have been lifted. GSA schedules and other vehicles help tick that box.
Great. Thanks. And Tony, any thoughts?
Yes, two things. The government's looking for solutions, and unfortunately, there are people out there selling snake oil. I agree with everything Judy said. Here is something important. Make sure that when you're dealing with the government, you know that the person you're dealing with has contract authority. It's important, even if necessary, to ask that question. The fact is that there were contract administration issues for the last several years. They continue. Also consider the possibility of OTAs. They're outside the scope of all the schedules, and the agencies are using them increasingly as a means to solve problems in the area of R&D, prototype, and production contracts.
Super great answers from both of you. 43, Jody, for employers with more than 500 employees, if the company elects to offer paid family leave and or sick leave to those employees as required under the Families First Coronavirus Act for companies under 500 employees, is there any potential to submit for an equitable adjustment where tax credits would not be applicable? Jody?
Yes, I do believe that there is the potential for an equitable adjustment. Once again, document. I mean, if the people listening to this take nothing else back from today, is you really have to document everything that you're doing as it's going along. And then the final thing is as soon as possible, discuss this with your ACO or whoever your chief contracting officer is, and feel them out. But I think with everything that is going on and with all the different kinds of aid packages that are being put together, and with the general push toward working with contractors, I think there's a very good chance that you could have an equitable adjustment and get paid for this. It's the right thing to do, if nothing else.
Great. And 44, my company is 8A certified. The Small Business Administration, SBA, is allowing my company to voluntarily suspend our certification for up to 1 year. Should I suspend my certification, and what questions should I be asking to make this decision? Josh, over to you for this.
Okay, so first, this is not new and it's not unusual. SBA has initiated the process to allow companies to voluntarily suspend certification due to a couple of actions. First, the President declared national emergency under the National Emergency Act. That triggered the emergency acquisition of 18.2. But what makes the situation unique is that because the national emergency is not localized, it's global, there's no clearly identified local areas. Therefore, at this time, local set-aside requirements don't apply. In plain English, if you're a woman, small, veteran, service-disabled, hub zone, the emergency declaration gives contracting officers the flexibility to bypass or even ignore set-asides. For many 8As, a voluntary suspension is a smart move. First, you can suspend up to a year. Second, you can lift your suspension at any time, but don't assume it'll be quick to get it back. However long you suspend your certification, that time's added to your current graduation date. And if you suspend, you can't win set-asides. But look, the government's not focused on them now anyway. If you're considering suspending your certification, I would ask myself 3 questions. First, are my products or services mission essential or mission critical? Second, do I have any bids or proposals currently in source selection? Third, do I have any opportunities in my pipeline where I have competitive intelligence and I've been working with the buyer? If you don't have any of these 3, I would consider voluntarily suspending your 8A certification.
Great, thanks. And 45, how does the Defense Production Act impact the government contracting community during this crisis? Jerry?
Yes, hi. Interestingly, I ran the Defense Production Act when I was in the Pentagon until I left a year and a half ago. It was very obscure until recently, as everyone, and I wrote a piece in The Hill last week called Sending in the Cavalry that talks about it. There are 3 active titles in the Defense Production Act, and 2 of them are relevant for government contracting firms. The first is on the rating of contracts, Title I, and which you've heard about with HHS being granted authority. That is allowing to rate contract orders, so your contracts could be rated DO or DX, which would put them by the federal orders to the front of the line. So that would be impacting, potentially impact companies. Another provision of that same title would be the federal government could take the control of the allocation of resources. That is kind of ventilators production take control of that industry. The current administration is not interested in doing that. They'd rather partner with industry. So that is not active at the moment. And the other place where you're going to see, and there's a lot of this in the bill that just passed, the Defense Production Act also has Title III, which is about doing investments through grants, principally, sometimes purchase commitments, even loans to rebuild industrial capacity in the United States. And I would see $3 billion were appropriated for the Defense Production Act fund in the bill that just passed. The average appropriation every year is about 50 or 60 million. So this is tremendous scale. And I would see this leading to a raft of projects that would be focusing on this is medium kind of 6 to 12 month kind of projects when they start, would be in areas like building rebuilding the supply chain for pharmaceuticals, so we're not relying on sole source situations from companies in China, and some other parts of the manufacturing supply chain. You're seeing this. There's some current Title III projects in areas like rare earths that are underway. So this is a well-known program and authority, but tremendous scale that's going to be a tremendous set of opportunities for across the government contracting community.
Okay, thank you. Number 46, I'm an experienced federal contractor. I've got expertise, products, vehicles, and capacity. What's my first move? Judy?
Start with people you know. Current buyers, current contacts, and friends who might be able to introduce you to them. Call them. Don't just email. Put yourself in their place and slow down and check in with them as human beings first. Focus on their most urgent problem and how you can help. Prepare some call notes beforehand and take a breath before you pick up the phone. Expect to take multiple tries to reach them. That's normal at the best of times, and these are not the best of times. If you reach them, take your time. Be the calm you and they want to see in the world. They're under a lot of pressure. If you leave voicemail, make it short and upbeat, encouraging, be specific about how you can help. Leave your phone number twice and tell them the date, time, and day you're going to call back. Mark your calendar so you do call them back, and then send an email as backup with a clear subject line. Persist and focus to support the people you are most meant to serve.
Super. Thank you. 47. How can we follow all of these legislative changes? Anne?
Well, we've been very involved. Our firm's been very involved in the process, and we do blogs on things that are moving legislatively. So first thing is just check our blog, madisonservicesgroup.blogspot.com, or look in LinkedIn. That we also provide a lot there. Second is look to organizations like the HubZone, Contractors National Council, Women Impacting Public Policy, the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce. All of them have up-to-date information and social media on legislation. And then last, look to law firms like Polaro Mazza, for example, has great resources around these changes and do frequent webinars, as I'm sure the other lawyers on this firm have as well.
Great, thanks. 48, based on the Emergency Declaration, the Defense Production Act, DPA, the National Interest Action, NIA, and the Emergency Acquisition Flexibilities of FAR 18.2, should I be focused on the system on SAM for finding opportunities or somewhere else? Josh?
So looking at these four, there's one that really actually gives the most flexibility to contracting officers, and that's the President's Emergency Declaration. Because as soon as the President declared it, it gave contracting officers the ability to award contracts pretty much any value without posting them to SAM or beta.sam. And remember, contracting officers, they've received such extensive acquisition flexibilities. Again, minimizing competition, accelerating procurements, limiting sources of supply, expediting. That means they can simply call 2 or 3 vendors, ask for a price on the phone, and award it. So yes, you need to maintain awareness of opportunities on SAM, but if contracting officers, and this has been referred to countless times now on this webinar, if the contracting officers don't know your name or have your phone number, yes, you're going to miss opportunities.
And 49, are the various pieces of LMB, DOD, and other guidance issued during this crisis legally binding to companies? Jerry?
No, they are not legally binding. They are, again, designed to help build maximum flexibility for work to continue where at all possible, but they are not legally binding to companies.
Okay, great. And Judy, over to you for number 50. We've never sold to the government before, but we've got something that can help. We're all like, put me in, coach. I'm ready to play. How can we help?
If you've never sold to government before, register in SAM.gov because that's required. Then if you've got something truly on the A list, if you've got N95 masks, respirators, read and follow instructions carefully if there's a supply opportunity that you can meet. Otherwise, slow down and learn. Buyers do not have time to teach you things right now. If you're looking around and see opportunities everywhere, start with one office where you know someone or the federal buyers call you. Learn the rules of the game from your Procurement Technical Assistance Center, aptac-us.org. Be patient, be persistent. Complete one sale first. Serve spectacularly well from start to finish. That past performance for that person who you served well will mean you'll get a positive answer when you say, how else can I help? Who else could I help?
Great. And 51, if a government site is closed for quarantine purposes and essential personnel are sent home, are we entitled to any type of equitable adjustment for lost wages, revenue due to scope change? And this seems like a somewhat of a repeat question. Anne, we'll go to you first in 30 seconds or less.
Yes, it is a repeat question. The new section of the CARES Act, Section 3610, addressed that issue that we discussed earlier.
Great. And Tony, anything to add? Tony, you might be on mute. If you've got anything to add, we'll give you a quick moment here.
Sorry. Yeah, it's important to call your contracting officer. The circumstances are changing. Be flexible. See if you can offer staggered workforce or other ways to solve your contract remotely. So if you're flexible and you deal with a contracting officer, you may find you're back at work.
Super. Thanks. 52, and we're doing pretty good on time. If a government site closing causes a delay in delivery of services or goods, are we entitled to any type of equitable adjustment for additional expenses such as storage of finished product? Jerry?
Yeah, this is similar to the last one. You're not entitled to an equitable adjustment, but I think that was the guidance OMB put out was, to agencies to use those kind of tools. So it is a possibility. You just got to, again, work with your contracting officer and your customer.
Sure. Thank you. And number 53, how do government contractors think about their marketing and relationship efforts post-COVID-19? William?
So the greatest thing, and it's been touched on a couple of times, is being top of mind. How do you gain access for your supplies and services to be top of mind with the contracting professionals that are working the response? Watch for the demand signals, and oftentimes in cases like this, the system moves from a push system to a pull system. So make sure that you're in the stream of the pulls from a standpoint of being top of mind and having your supplies and services in front of the people that are looking for those supplies and services.
Thank you. And 54, Judy, to you for this one. How will the stimulus funding make its way to government contractors, and what is the best way to secure that funding? Where do we go, and what do we need to do?
Jennifer, when I looked at this, I have to say that I might have jumped the gun a little bit, but I was looking, and so people who have looked at the bill that just passed may have information that I don't have, but I was only looking at two things. People have talked about loans already, so I'm not going to talk about those. The only other thing I was thinking about was that additional funds that have been authorized and appropriated for agencies to buy products and services. So focus on trusted relationships, on solving the most immediate problems. Start with people and agencies you know, and serve them as if your life and theirs depended on it. Because right now, possibly more than ever, it actually does.
Super, thank you. And 55, Seth, how do we verify if someone qualifies to charge to the Emergency Paid Sick Leave, EPSL, and Expanded Family Medical Leave Act, FMLA?
Well, with respect to the emergency sick leave, you will gradually be able to obtain medical certification to be able to support that. Be patient, because people are going to have difficulty seeing their doctors in person, but you will be able to document sick leave. With respect to expanded FMLA leave, you are also entitled to and should be receiving supporting documentation. Those sorts of things can gradually also be provided. If you have people off site and, for example, there's a local shelter-in-place order or some kind of a directive by someone in another state, by the governor, then you are entitled to be able to get those materials to confirm that that person is entitled to be qualified for that kind of leave under the new legislation.
Okay, great. And 56, how do you best take care of your team and lead in uncertain times? William, assuming this is, I'm going to assume this is from a government contractor perspective.
Sure, certainly. So I have a very simple but I think powerful framework. First, make sure that you're engaged. Make sure you're attentive to the issues at hand. Second, lead with empathy. Okay, understand that the situation that you and your employees are in. Third, equip your team to be effective. Give them the necessary strategies, tactics, and tools to be effective. Fourth, be willing to evolve. We all live in a different world today than we did 30 to 60 days ago. Be ready to evolve into the new world. 5, set clear expectations. of what the desired outcomes and goals are, and then sixth, least but definitely not last but definitely not least, execute.
And thank you for that. 57, what is the best way to introduce a new product line that will be of value to the VA medical centers and military hospitals during this pandemic? Who to notify of this product line for the greatest impact during a time of need and getting approval? Jerry?
Yeah, here the best way to do it is through your network, someone that's already connected with that customer set. If you don't have the connections, because going through the front door is going to be hard. Obviously, there'll be eventually get solicitations out on sam.gov, but I think you're going to want to kind of work those as soon as possible through your network to identify and those and bring your product to market there.
Okay. And 58, how, if at all, does the new COVID-19 environment affect terminations for standard reasons, for example, non-performance, lack of updated qualifications, etc.? In other words, are there any new or special employee rights that should be considered given the declaration of national and state emergency? Seth?
The corona crisis does not provide any kind of a blanket of protection as a matter of employment law as it relates to terminating someone's employment because of inadequate performance. The employer still retains the traditional discretion to separate someone's employment if they are not performing the basic functions of the job and are underperforming. And as a result of that, that analysis should not be complicated as a result of the crisis. If the person is being separated because of inadequate performance, that employee does not obtain any additional rights as a matter of employment law simply as a result of the crisis.
Okay, thank you. And 59, can you summarize the capital for small business sections of the relief package? Anne?
So this is really hard to do in a short amount of time because it's fairly complicated, but there's 3 new things in the new CARES Act that just passed. One is the Paycheck Protection Program. That's new. That's an 8-week program for cash flow assistance to small employers that maintain their payroll. So for 500 or under, it includes the self-employed, gig economy workers, nonprofits that are 501c3s and veteran organizations, 501c19s, and tribal businesses. So there's that program, and actually there's a forgiveness section that you can get up to 8 weeks of forgiveness of the loan if it's used for payroll. I'm just gonna, in the interest of time, have to skip over all the particulars, but SBA will have it up on their website, in the not too distant future because it just passed. They'll have to put it there. The second program is the Emergency Economic Injury Disaster Loan Grants, and so those are grants, not loans. They're grants for an advance of up to $10,000, which will be deployed in like 3 days of asking for it, and it will be for to maintain payroll, provide sick leave, and service debt obligations. And then the third thing is for existing borrowers who have already borrowed through SBA programs. SBA will pay all the principal, interest, and fees on existing loan products for 6 months. So major grant, which is not a loan, and then loans with forgiveness to aid small businesses.
Thank you. Good information. Number 60, I directly invest and buy stock in a lot of prime contractors, for example, Kaki, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed, et cetera. Do you foresee an uptick in the valuation of these firms in the stock market? Do you think there will be any mergers and acquisitions that result from this crisis within the government contracting publicly traded firms? Jerry?
Yeah, great question. I think traditionally aerospace and defense stocks or government contracting stocks are viewed as sort of when you have turbulence, they're sort of safe plays. And given the current marketplace, I would foresee them generally kind of an uptick there because most of the companies are still working. There's a difference actually between the platform companies and the service companies. That is, CACI being a service company, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed, platform companies. They're the platform companies are more stable because they are on existing contracts and they are building platforms. So as long as their factories or production facilities are open, they'll continue to work. And service companies, it's going to depend a lot on how their contracting agreements, so that whether or not they can keep working. And then the wild card, not the wild card, but the companies that have significant commercial aviation components, Boeing, Honeywell, some of those, they've got real challenges right now because the commercial aircraft industry is really impacted by this. For the second question, M&A coming out of it, there's two potentials. One would be, companies that were struggling, weren't positioned well financially prior to this, could become acquisition targets for across the board, and after this. And the second would be maybe M&A that comes from companies that defense companies are looking to get into some of the manufacturing or pharmaceutical space. That it's going to be opportunities are going to come out of that post COVID-19. That one's kind of a hard sell though, because it's hard to see real clear adjacencies in that with most of the companies, but there may be some opportunities there.
Okay, thanks. 61, Jody, in the event the government issues a stop work order that results in a WARN triggering event, is there any resource for the company to submit an equitable adjustment in the event the company has to make remedies to employers as a result of unforeseen business circumstances under WARN is not considered a valid reason for lack of notice? Hopefully you can understand what the question is conveying there, Jody.
I do, sort of. And it's kind of a mixing of things, because if you're issued a stop work order and as a result of the stop work order, you have to lay off a bunch of employees, and the WARN Act is actually kind of not invoked, quite frankly, and you can submit your request for equitable adjustment purely because of the stop work order. However, I think with the legislation that is out there, there's going to be a lot more coverage for the stop work, for if you are doing the stop work order. It's going to depend on why the stop work order is issued too. And finally, normally WARN is not, the WARN notices are not applicable if there's a natural disaster. And while this is a financial disaster, it has been declared a disaster. And so WARN probably will not apply. What is going to be potentially more troubling for some companies is going to be the state WARN-like acts. Like California has a much stricter act than the federal government does. And so on a state-by-state basis, companies do need to take a look at that. But I also think with the $2 trillion stimulus act, even under a stop work order, work with your contracting officer to see what they're willing to have happen and not happen is probably their best bet.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I believe this might be our last question. Jerry, number 62. How can I find out ways that my company can help respond to this crisis, and where's the stimulus money going that will be addressable for government contracting companies?
Yeah, well, it's a lot of places. I think many firms that do forecasting can help companies. We put out a report a couple of days ago that started identifying some of them. Beta.sam.gov is the easy place to go for a lot of them, but you also want to for state and local level that's not applicable. And it's going to go in a lot of different marketplaces, different government agencies where you wouldn't expect it necessarily, like heavy in defense, Veterans Affairs and the like. So there's lots of different opportunities for companies that want to help.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I want to thank everybody again for joining us. These were the questions that we received up through, I believe, Thursday evening. So if you sent us something this morning or if you typed something in, please contact anybody on this screen and the next screen who might be able to answer your question. So we had Roderick Johnson from the SBA, Tony Anarchy from Williams Mullen, Jody Reed from McMahon Welch Learned, Seth Behrensweg from Behrensweg Leonard, Ann Sullivan over at Madison Services Group, Clay Goldsboro over at First Financial Group, And I just see a small typo on his email address. It should be at ffgadvisors.com. Judy Brad at Summit Insight, Jerry McGinn at GMU, Josh Frank at RSM Federal, and William Randolph at thinkacquisition.net. Again, thanks everybody. And the recording, we should have that up in about an hour. You'll get an email with the link to the recording. The slides are already up on slideshare.net. And thanks again. If you have additional questions, you can contact us directly or give us a call. Thank you.
Jennifer, fabulous job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe, everyone.